Hello, my name is Thomas Felix Creighton. Welcome to British Culture. Albion Never Dies. Only one man has directed as many as 5 James Bond movies, and today I'm joined by John Glen, who directed For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy and A View to a Kill, all starring Roger Moore, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, starring Timothy Dalton, as well as Christopher Columbus' The Discovery, and working on The Italian Job, The Admirable Crichton, and being responsible for the amazing parachute jump at the beginning of The Spy Who Loved Me. You join us as we get to know each other. And hello, my name is Thomas. Thank you very, very much for joining the call.
All right, Thomas, where are you from?
I'm living in Yorkshire right now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So a little bit far away. But I used to live in China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Oman.
Yeah.
Various others.
You sound well-travelled. Rather like yourself.
I get out and about. I think not quite as well-travelled as yourself in terms of countries visited.
Well, that's it's quite a nice business if you like travelling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as I travel around the world, lots of people say, if you're British, you must be James Bond.
Oh. It is. Yeah, it's an iconic phrase that really is becoming into the English language, and it means, I think, personified by probably Roger Moore. You know, he was a good example of tall, good-looking, very straightforward, very intelligent man, because I worked with him on about 11 films altogether.
Yeah, so not just the Bond films, like Gold and quite a few others.
Yeah, I remember years ago I was an editor on Danger Man with Patrick McGowan, who would also have made a great Bond. And he was a good friend of Roger's. But Roger was working on the Saint series at the same time. So we were kind of rivals in a funny sort of way. And it wasn't until Spy Who Loved Me, I think, that we actually came together. And from then on, we were inseparable.
That wasn't your first time meeting him, right? That was the first time you worked together.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And how closely did you work with him on The Spy Who Loved Me?
Oh, very, very close. You see, I was sent off to the Arctic to shoot the ski parachute jump initially. And, I was out there in the Arctic for about three weeks, struggling against the elements. And eventually I got that wonderful shot. Take one, print, that was it. You know, the weather was unbelievable up there. We had to camp out at the base of Mount Asgard, and we weren't sort of survival experts, and it was extremely cold, and there were a crew of about 24, 25 people, and we were huddled into 3 tents initially, and it got so cold we all finished up in one tent, all huddled together.
I think I might have told you I showed this to a group of 100 Chinese people who'd never seen it before, and I've never seen a piece of footage get such a standing ovation. And I even had someone come up to me and say, I know they must have done it for real, but how can this be done?
Yeah Well, there's a couple of mountains in the world. Mount Asgard is one of them. It's a vertical rock face going up about 7,500 feet. Wow. And it's absolutely a precipice. You know, there's no obstructions on the way down. It goes straight down. So, you know, for Rick Sylvester, who was the double who actually performed the stunt, you know, we dressed him up as Roger Moore. And Rick was an incredibly calm stuntman from California. And he showed us some footage he'd shot in California, going off of a mountain in the Yosemite National.
Oh, right.
And he went off like a sack of potatoes. And when I interviewed him, I said, you know, that won't do for a James Bond film. You have to go off with style and grace. And he assured me that he could do it, and he was true to his word. He did a wonderful job.
Absolutely. It's very striking.
Yeah.
There's such an international team making these films. What do you think makes them so uniquely British?
I'm not sure, really. I think, obviously Ian Fleming's work is very, very British. His the style of writing, etc. There's a certain amount of snobbery involved. Roger, was at the original choice, I think, of Fleming to play Bond. And Sean Connery, of course, he wasn't too sure about Sean initially. Glasgow milkman, he was a bit of a snob, I think, deep down. But it turned out that Sean was a fantastic choice for Bond. And everyone struck really since then as Roger's, I think, the nearest that's ever come up to Sean.
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, Sean had the choice of the best books from Ian Fleming, Goldfinger and From Russia with Love, wonderful stories. And they had the pick. And when I came along, of course, we were struggling a bit with the stories. So we were back to the short stories and having to develop my first film, For Your Eyes Only, as director, was based on a short story. And I had to expand that to a whole film. And it took a bit of doing. And we had some good writers. And of course, the scene was set, in a sense, had been set by previous directors and what have you. So,
absolutely.
It's a very, very enjoyable experience.
It's a very notable film for a very, very strong female character. You worked with some very strong female characters. Grace Jones comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, she's a character. I bump into her now and again. She appears at the Henley Festival occasionally, and she's still going strong. An incredible character.
Yes, absolutely. Was there sometimes a consideration of, especially the women, because with Bond you've got the set character, but the female leads are quite strong in your films.
Yeah, well, it's a very important role, isn't it? I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of sort of classical actresses kind of avoid being cast in a James Bond film. It's a strange mixture. You've got to have the glamour, and you've also got to have the acting ability. And we used to go to great lengths to find our leading ladies, but we had great success, I think.
Oh, especially with Maud Adams, I might say.
Yeah, Maud. She did 2 Bond films, which is wonderful, and we were pretty desperate for the second time she appeared to find someone, and someone turned around and said, "Well, what about bringing Maud back?" She came over, and she was a lovely, lovely lady, but she still is. And she appeared. I put her into a 3rd film, actually, but she only appeared in the background, just as a kind of a gag. We were shooting in San Francisco, and she was there visiting us. We were great friends. And I said, "Why don't you just walk through the background of this scene?" And she goes unnoticed, but she's there somewhere.
It's somewhere in the Fisherman's Wharf scene in View to a Kill, isn't it?
Yeah, in Fisherman's Wharf, yeah.
I've visited and I've watched that section of the film many times with a magnifying glass. I'm trying to find her. And one unusual element you worked with, some people say never work with children or animals. You've worked with quite a few animals.
Yeah, I love having animals in films. I know that they do cause problems. They're good for take 1. Never try take 2 with an animal. Take 1 means unaware of all the flashing lights and the nasty explosions and what have you.
Oh no, yeah.
And he goes into it in good spirits, but after take 1, forget it. Bring in number 2, dog number 2.
It's quite striking throughout your films. Even the Columbus film, one of the most memorable bits, oddly, is the rat coming ashore.
Oh yeah, the rats.
It's very striking.
That was surprisingly easy. I think they were quite glad to get off the ship. I think they came skipping down the rope.
Oh, it's a very striking part. And you are best known for action. And I was viewing the action scenes, and the way they're paced and broken up with humor is quite different from a lot of films now.
Yes, I think probably A License to Kill with Timothy Dalton. The truck sequence was like a 20-minute sequence at least, and it involved lots and lots of stunts. And we had to find 12 oil tankers in Mexico to shoot that scene. And it was a very... Remy Julien was our stunt coordinator, who's a well-known French stunt team. And I'd worked previously with him on the Italian job many years previously. And when I kind of half entered that sequence about the trucks, I immediately thought of Remy Julien. And sure enough, he came out to Mexico to a mountain location called Rumoroso. And we shot that sequence, a combination of first unit directed by me, which involved the main artists, and Arthur Worcester, who was my second unit cameraman, and director, did a fantastic job with doing all the other stunt work and supervising that sequence. Did a wonderful job.
It's a very striking sequence. It looks very beautiful, but I understand the conditions are actually quite tough.
Yeah, it was a perfect location because it was it was a disused road. This particular section of road, which was about probably 4 or 5 miles long, was so dangerous. They'd had so many fatal accidents on that road because there was a precipice on the side of almost every turn, every bend, that they built a bypass, a much safer route, and closed that road. But of course, it was ideal for us because we had exclusive use of a closed road, as dangerous as it might be.
Absolutely. Was it Arthur Worcester who was also responsible for the train fight in Octopussy?
That's right. Well, Arthur, it was really strange, really, because when I got the gig to do For Your Eyes Only, I had a meeting with Cubby Broccoli in his office, and he said, who's going to be your second unit director? Because I had previously been second unit director. So I said, without hesitation, I said, Arthur Worcester. And he said, who's that? He'd never heard of him. Arthur was a documentary cameraman, director, and I'd worked with him previously when I was working on documentaries for an outfit called Film Partnership. And Arthur was one of those very self-sufficient cameramen. You know, he had all his own equipment, and he was a single man with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and know-how. He was well known for being screwed into the front of fighter jets and doing documentary films. So he was a kind of an action cameraman, all right. And I was so impressed with Arthur, and he was a very modest man. And I eventually talked Cubby into allowing Arthur to come down for an interview. And Arthur was quite a small man, and he used to have very thick glasses. He'd wear these thick glasses. So he was the last person in the world when you saw him who could be what turned out to be a fantastic cameraman director. Anyway, he came down into the studio, Pinewood Studios, and I was in the office, and Barbara Broccoli, Cubby's daughter, came running in. She said, there's a strange man walking around looking for your office. Oh, I said, that would be Arthur. So Arthur walked in, tripped over the carpet. I introduced him to Cubby, and Cubby gave me a rather strange look. And we had a pretty awful interview with Cubby and Arthur. It took me quite a couple of weeks to convince Cubby that Arthur was our man. And of course, after that film, he became... in fact, he went on to do more Bond films than I did, I think, in the end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But that documentary angle seems to have worked. Some people say that Bond works best when it's perhaps improbable, but not implausible. It can work.
Oh, yes. Yeah, all the stuff, most of the stuff we did was shot for real. We employed the very, Remy Julien was almost a scientist the way he developed his stunts. You know, he didn't leave anything to chance. He used to rehearse on an aerodrome near Paris. And, these trucks would be driven onto ramps and dropped down into boxes, huge amount of boxes they used to use to cushion the blow when the vehicle landed, all off camera, of course. And but he was a very clever man, and he had a terrific team working for him. And they didn't speak a lot of English, actually, so there was a lot of sign language involved.
But I imagine the last thing you want to do with such action sequences is improvise on set.
Yes, that's right. Well, you have to be careful. See, fortunately, I had a background of being a film editor. So it became quite easy for me to break an action sequence down into easy to shoot pieces. You know, most of you analysed any of our action sequences. I think the average duration is about 2 seconds per shot. So you only shoot what you need to shoot for that particular shot. And it's all storyboarded, rather like a comic cuts. And so, you know, if it involves the principals, then it would be first unit. If it doesn't involve the principals, then it would be doubles. That would be second unit. If it was underwater sequence, it would be third unit. If it was aerial sequence, BJ Worth would come into the equation of the fourth unit. And all these scenes were going on at the same time in countries thousands of miles apart. So communication was essential. And the beauty about the second unit, third unit, fourth unit is that I can ask them to repeat the shot if it doesn't work first time. When I see the rushes, if it's not what I want, then I get on the phone to the director and say, "Well, redo that," because they're a small unit and it doesn't cost a fortune. It costs plenty, but it's not like the first unit. So this week you've got 140 people, highly paid actors, and a schedule you have to keep, because if you don't keep your schedule, you're in a lot of trouble, because the expense, the overages for actors and so forth is tremendous.
And there's one interesting difference. You mentioned your background in editing. There, it's your hands, your eyes. As soon as you move to directing, you're overseeing other people. I'm curious about your leadership style, if this was ever something you thought about.
Yeah, I've always been pretty good. You ask my wife, I've been pretty good at delegating. And, you know, if you set out, I mean, a lot of directors want to do every shot themselves. Quite famous directors, you know, just want to, you know, they can't allow someone else to do any part of their film. You know, I've worked with a few of those in the past. And it's crazy, particularly on a big action film. You have to delegate. You have to split off various scenes to people that you choose, people you know and trust, and you have a good relationship with. It's all about relationships and being able to convey your thoughts to them.
Would you say communication and trust is a big part of it?
Exactly. So, I mean, it's relatively, it was quite simple. I mean, there was a good example, I think, in For Your Eyes Only. We were doing the keel hauling sequence, which we'd been written for another film, funnily enough, another James Bond film, and hadn't been used. And we saw an opportunity to use it. So we had James Bond and the leading lady being towed along with their hands tied and what have you. And while we were shooting the scenes with Roger Moore and the leading lady in Greece, another unit was working in the Caribbean in clear water, shooting the underwater part of the same sequence, precisely at the same time we were working. And it was a great lesson in how you can coordinate these things if you plan them properly and you trust the people that are doing these work.
And at the end of the day, you can't show those images at that time directly. It has to be, I guess, telephone.
Yeah. And you look at the rushes, you see the rushes come back maybe 3 or 4 days after they shot the sequence. And you say, no, that didn't quite work. Do that shot again. And you've got the storyboards you prepared. So they know exactly what you're talking about. And they have another go. And eventually they get it right.
Fantastic. And in your book, which is wonderful, you mentioned For Your Eyes Only, and that the opening scene may have been inspired by your time with the Sea Cadets. The opening bit with the naval mine in the water. And you mentioned going out with the naval cadets.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Well, when I was about 13 or 14, I was a Sea Cadet. And I remember the war was just finishing. And one of the trips we did was on a minesweeper. We went out into the English Channel. And we were allowed to fire the machine guns and everything at objects in the water. And at that time, there were a lot of mines floating around in the channel.
Mm-hmm.
So we were busy looking for mines on this minesweeper. We expended an awful lot of ammunition, but didn't see any mines.
I'm sure it was good training.
Yeah.
Wonderful. How long were you with the Sea Cadet?
Oh, probably till I outgrew the uniform, I think. probably a couple of years. Yeah.
Did it help you at all? Because obviously Bond is supposed to be a naval commander. You mentioned that Bond shouldn't have his hands in his pockets, which is a very, very naval officer thing.
Yeah, that's right. I felt strongly about those things. Tim didn't necessarily agree with me. Roger did, though. Roger was a very smart dresser. Anyway, but the naval cadet thing did help me, strangely enough, because one of my fellow colleagues in the Sea Cadets was a chap called Whacker Williams. That was his nickname, Whacker. I don't know why. And anyway, he got a job at Walton-on-Thames Film Studios as a messenger boy, a runner. And he told me, he landed this job in the film business, as a runner. And it kind of rather inspired me. So I went over to Walton-on-Thames to what is now a car park, but then was Nettlefold Studios.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to the commissioner and I said, is there any job for a messenger boy? And he looked at me and he said, no, the uniform won't fit you, boy. So he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll call Shepperton Studios. It's a much bigger studio and they might have a vacancy there. So I got on my bike and I went over to Shepperton Studios, which was a bigger studio.
Mm-hmm.
And spoke to the commissioner there, and he took my name and address down. And about 4 weeks later, I got a letter. A phone. We didn't have a phone at home. It just shows you how long ago it was. And I got an interview at Shepperton, and I was one of about 16 messenger boys.
Oh.
And a lot of those, or most of those boys, all went on to be directors, cameramen, what have you, all starting from such a humble position.
Mm.
This was before the days of, colleges for film studies and so forth.
And you got to see all the different aspects of the business, right?
Yeah, you learned on the job. Well, I as a messenger boy, I was sent to various the master carpenter's office. I was the office boy with him for a while, mm-hmm. And a lot of my friends from school, their fathers were carpenters and what have you. So I used to go out of the office and make trays and all kinds of bits of woodwork. And then the phone would ring and I'd dash back in the office and pick up the phone and take a message for the master carpenter. He was a wonderful chap called Percy Rawlinson, and I'll never forget him, very kind man. So I did that for a while. I did that. I got my love of woodwork. It was my hobby at one time. I enjoyed that.
And purely because my name is Crichton, you worked on a movie called The Admirable Crichton.
I did. But also the name came up. Lewis Gilbert was the director of The Admirable Crichton.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful director, probably one of the most successful British directors. He's done so many films. And what a humble, nice man he was. And he was opposite of what I expected to find. And I was fortunate enough to work on, I was a sound editor on The Admirable Crichton. So I got to know Lewis on that time, and it was a very enjoyable film to work on. And many years later, I worked with an editor called Thelma Connell, who was on the Robin Hood series, again at Nettlefold Studios at Walton. And I worked on a series as a sound editor, The Four Just Men, I think the series was called. And towards the end of the series, she said to me, oh, John, I'm going to have to start laying off the staff as we're coming to the end. And there were two sound editors. And she said, I know that when you leave here, you'll get another job straight away, but I'm not sure about the other chap. So would you mind going first?
Oh, wow.
It was sort of a backhanded compliment. Yes. I was out of the job, but I was getting a compliment. She was right. I did get another job. I went and worked on a film called The Three Men in a Boat at Shepperton.
Yeah.
And that really kick-started my career in a way. It was great.
Yeah. And so you had a real love of editing, right?
Oh yes, yeah. Well, editing. I mean, I was lucky that I was able to progress all through this, the junior stages of editing. I was an assistant editor, a second assistant, a first assistant, a sound editor, an assembly editor, and then I became an editor eventually. Ruined a couple of films, I'm sure, before I eventually learned my craft.
But it's wonderful. Often when I see your films, there's very little sequences with mini stories within the stories, right? So I am quite curious. There's an element of editing. There's also an element of writing and creation within all this.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, Michael Wilson was my producer with Cubby Broccoli on the Bond films. We were a great team, really. We'd start off with a blank piece of paper and maybe a short story, and we developed the scenes. And Richard Maybaum was one of the early writers as well, who was a great, he knew how to lay out a script, and very experienced Hollywood writer. And we worked very closely together. And when they came to an action sequence, he said, and then there was a fight, and then leave a blank. And it was over to John to work out the fight, or a train sequence, or whatever it was, or an aerial sequence. It's just leave a blank, and then they get on with the rest of the story. And I'd be working in another office, working out an action sequence, which I love doing. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I think for Your Eyes Only, lots of people remember the man on the ladder. I think Bond drives under, then the villains drive past. You get those reaction shots mixed in.
Sure. Yeah. No, there was some. We filmed that in Greece, and it was a wonderful location. We seem to like islands because you don't have to travel too far. One of the big problems on filmmaking is that you have to transport the unit, 100 and odd people, from the hotel to the actual location where you're shooting. And sometimes it's like a 2-hour journey from the hotel. If you're working in a remote area like a desert or something, it can be even more.
Or in the Arctic Circle up a mountain.
Exactly. But we were a small unit, you see. That's the whole secret, is to have a small unit of expert people and use doubles. And it's still expensive. I think The Spy Who Loved Me pre-title, and that was only one or two shots, I think, in the whole sequence were shot there, and it cost $250,000 in 1979 or whatever it was.
Gosh, yes.
So it was a huge amount of money, and Cubby Broccoli, you have to admire him. He had great faith in me. I wasn't so sure at the time. I tell you, when I was huddled in that tent in the freezing conditions, but we had a good team, and we came home with the goods. And then I shot the rest of the sequence in Switzerland, which is much more controllable.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned Cubby Broccoli, and you've mentioned a few other guys who you seem to see as mentors, right? You've had some. Is it fair to say you've had some good mentors in the industry?
Yeah, oh yeah. Cubby was great because he was reaching the end of his career, I suppose, but he loved to watch the tennis in his office and what have you. But he dealt with all the major matters. He dealt with all the Hollywood end, because half the film towards the end was owned by MGM UA. Used to be UA, they were a pleasure to work with. MGM UA wasn't quite such a happy relationship, but they kept bringing in these hatchet men to try and cut our budgets down. And we were very economical. I mean, we used to make our films for like $30 million.
Yeah.
Year after year. And they kept saying, you've got to cut the budget down. You've got to cut the budget down. Well, it's a quality series. There's a limit. But we were efficient, and Cubby was a great mentor. He was a very strong man and dealt with the American end very well. We didn't, as the director, you don't really see half of what goes on, but there's an awful lot of politics and an awful lot of shouting and screaming that goes on over the telephone. Oh,
So it sounds like he gave you the space to do your work.
That's right. He did exactly that, which is what a producer does. he takes the flak and you do the work.
Yeah. But he's still very involved. He can be on set with you, and is that fair?
Yeah, we used to love him being on set somehow. And he was great pals with Roger Moore, and they used to play backgammon because there's an awful lot of waiting around for actors. That's one of the first things they have to learn, is how to be patient and just sit around and not get too bored, while the technical stuff's going on and the lighting, etc. And Cubby was very good that way. He always kept Roger happy, played backgammon, kept him entertained, and he was a joy to work with, Roger and Cubby.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And I really just have one more question, which is, the James Bond has a formula. Have you ever been able to pin down what is that formula?
Well, that's something we discussed in the office with Cubby quite often, and we all had our own take on it. But the formula is, you have you create a situation, then you have an action scene, then you have a love scene, and then you keep bringing the changes. I'm not sure that anyone could actually say that this is the formula, but it's the action has to be interspersed with story and love interest. That's basically it, but it's not as easy as that, believe me.
Oh, no. I don't imagine it's easy. No, thank you very, very much. It's been a real pleasure. I just draw to a close here. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And again, thank you so much for...
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you.
I understand pear drops are your favourite, so...
That's right.
You send me your address, I'll send you some pear drops. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And no, again, it's been a real, real pleasure.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And video.
You should have been an actor.
Oh, maybe later.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you so much to John Glen for joining me. Thank you for listening.